Hello and welcome to The Rightest Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie, the podcast for the politically homeless. In the last episode, we had a look at the problems with the housing crisis in Australia and who's to blame. And that's now my highest viewed video, so thank you for that, anyone returning. And I think what it touched on, why it sparked a lot of debate in the comments, is because this is a highly complex issue. And I did focus on a specific element of it, and our friend, who I'll remind everyone of, Eddie Deline, who owns 150 properties and is considered a mega landlord. I wasn't trying to say he is the problem or individuals who work in the capitalist system that we're in Australia and exploit those loopholes and legal avenues to build a property portfolio like that. My criticism is around the government and the policies and the ways that that can happen, and how if we have 1 in 7 people living in poverty, renters, that number of renters going up and people's cost of living, more and more of their bills going towards rent and not being able to ever afford a property, we need to do something about that. And so in this episode, I'm going to have a look at solutions, look at what the political parties in Australia proposed in the 2025 election, and I will go up through their popularity, through the lowest votes up to Labor, who is in charge. So at the moment with the majority, especially in the House, not in the Senate, but Labor is in power, and really their policies are the ones that we have to keep a watch. So this is sort of my first Labor scorecard check-in in terms of how they're going on housing and living by their policies. So let's just break it down. I just need to say as well, my profession is a psychologist. I'm not a politician. I'm not in policy, or especially in housing, I'm not an expert at all. I'm learning alongside as I do this. So even though this is kind of educational and I'm talking about the complex issue of housing, I'm definitely learning as I go. So I appreciate the comments. If I've missed something or you need to correct me on something, or if you're an expert, please let me know and we can have a conversation. I'm hoping to have an expert on housing as a separate episode, which would be really great to get an understanding of how we can look at this problem and what policies that the government could enact to increase home ownership in Australia. You know, we're never going to get rid of renters. I'm not saying that too. There's always a proportion of people that are going to rent, or people that don't want to own homes. But with that home ownership number plummeting, especially with younger people, it's a problem. We need to do something about it. So these are the top 4 issues. If we look at, I've read a lot of the Housing Institute policies and a lot of different think tanks from the right and the left. So this isn't just, I know my thing is the rightest leftist. This is not about any particular political point of view. It's just the problems with the housing industry. And then we'll look at what the major parties say about that. So the big 4 are supply, planning and zoning, bias towards investors in terms of policies, and the demographics, which includes things like immigration. That's a big one, but also a lot of older Australians, people that have had a family home for 50 or so years plus in inner suburbs that are huge amounts of land, and people then having to can only afford out in the suburbs and things like that, younger people and young homeowners in terms of the demographics as well. So let's first look at supply. So I'm keeping in mind with some of the commenters that maybe I didn't go into enough depth, or I got something wrong. So comment if that's the case. So I'm not covering these like this is everything, but these are sort of the top 3 aspects of the top 4 issues. So kind of 12 dot points on the problems of the housing crisis in Australia. So the big one that pretty much everyone agrees on is that there's not enough new dwellings built. Dwellings is sort of the general term, which includes, apartments, townhouses, units, things like that, not just the standard house, which not everyone wants to live in or isn't possible. They're not going to build houses in the middle of the city, for example. The social housing stock, which I talked about last time as well, that number's going down. So you can see there over the last 5 to 10 years, it's gone down from about 6% to 3%. So going under a 5% benchmark. And what it does then is low income people who can't necessarily afford private rentals are being forced into the private market, which is creating a lot of problems. And this is where, just in terms of my political point of view about how we need to support struggling Aussies, people that, for whatever reason, if they've lost their job or escaping domestic violence situations that might be out of their control, it makes their lives worse, and then they're not able to be employed and productive members of society if there's not that social housing for them to get back on their feet. And the other one, which is acknowledged in supplies, rising construction costs and the labour shortages, meaning, as you can see there, a lot of this is sort of a hangover from COVID, but still ongoing supply chain constraints, material prices skyrocketing, trade shortages, which then delay the projects, inflate costs, and slow new builds. So there's especially an issue with supply in terms of the cost of materials and shortage on trades and things like that. Planning. So the planning and zoning is a huge issue. There's a lengthy local approval process. So councils and states, the planning bodies, can take too long to approve developments, which can add uncertainty and cost. A lot of that, they would say, is around environmental concerns and things like that, that we're not just going to rubber stamp anything. But there's an argument to be made that that approval process includes too much red tape. Some restrictive zoning laws, so there's that concept of NIMBYs, which it means not in my backyard. So often wealthier people in inner suburbs are opposed to high density. That's ongoing. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, and that's ongoing in a lot of urban areas where there's a lot of local dissent or opposition to higher density, like apartment buildings. People have this, maybe a family home they've had for 40 years in a nice leafy suburb, and they don't want apartments being built there. And then infrastructure bottlenecks. This is one I personally experienced buying a house in an estate. So a house, we've got to remember, a house can't just be propped up and built anywhere. You need roads, water transport, all the things, infrastructure around the housing to be developed first. So a lot of the time land can be zoned for housing, but if it doesn't have that infrastructure, then obviously it can't be built, and that creates a lot of problems. This is one I kind of focused on in the last video, which may have triggered some people, and that's okay. There is definitely, inarguably, just because the policies are there. Now, you might say that you might agree with the policies, or you might be an investor yourself and be benefiting from that. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a bias towards investors in Australian policy. So things like negative gearing and the capital gains concessions, which are tax savings. Now, people might say that because the person can deduct money from their income, it doesn't mean that the government should get that money. That's a whole other debate. But the fact is, people get tax savings as investors in Australia on investment properties. Another one that I didn't really touch on, but is a huge one too, that I've been looking at, and a lot of things like Coles and Woolworths do this, which is called land banking. So what they do is they will just have a big portion of land. Often it's undeveloped, like industrial land, or you might see in an estate like empty blocks. So what they often do is they just leave it sitting there vacant, waiting for the price to rise. And so what that does, it'll make them rich if they can sell it for a higher cost down the line. But that means there's a family that can't live in that a house that could be built there. Or if there's this huge a block of land that like Woolies owns, and this is happening, and maybe I'll do a separate video on it, that's a whole sort of maybe block of apartments that can't be built. And usually these are in really sought after areas. And the reasons why they do it is so then someone can't come in and build a competing supermarket or something like that in a zoned area. Now that's getting into like commercial versus like industrial commercial versus residential property, but it definitely happens in residential areas too. And then also the government demand side subsidies as well. So a lot of deposit schemes and shared equity programs, which is what Labor is doing as well, can increase the buying power. So this can be for first home buyers. So this one, a lot of the time, it is usually for principal properties, so like what they call PPOR, so your principal place of residence, so your house. But a lot of the time there are other programs too, or subsidies. So what that does is it boosts the demand, but not always the supply, because it'll mean people can afford, maybe like when the bank wouldn't have loaned them the money, now maybe they will, but it doesn't necessarily increase that supply as well. The demographics. So the population growth outpacing housing growth. So there is a migration surge. Sorry, my left-wing friends. The fact is, in 2024, there were 446,000 net migration numbers, which means total of people that came into Australia minus the total of people that left was 446,000. The year before that was over 500,000. It's unsustainable, but it really, that puts a strain on the housing market. We can't deny that. And a lot of it is high international student and temporary visas. And a lot of the time, those students, and I know this through doing some of the teaching of psychology at one of the unis, students often congregate or live in metro areas or high density areas, like with apartments and things, often for affordability, but especially because most of the unis, some of them are suburban, but most are in the urban areas, take up a lot of the housing supply through that. Again, no moral, I'm not in this video today saying anything's good or bad. I'm just talking about things that are affecting the housing market. The other problem that we have to look at is the aging population and the shrinking household size. So a lot of the time, single person households are on the increase, especially with renters and things like that, for whatever reason, whether that's through separations or people just wanting to live alone. And then longer retirements, people are staying in, so with the aging population, they're staying in bigger houses for longer. And that's meaning, if you look at a suburb, if you have a street that has like 50 houses on it that are a certain size, and it's single people living in it, that's less and less density that you can have of people living in the area too. And that sort of links to the NIMBY thing, where people might have a really big block of land in a really nice suburb, but only have 3 people, like a mum and dad and a child or something living there, when maybe that could be zoned for apartments and things like that. So great, I summed it up in 12 minutes, the problem. So the next step is, where do the political parties stand or focus on? So if we look through their policies, which we're going to do, these ticks here are sort of, I've got the 4 issues there, and where do the political parties put their focus in their policies? So it's from the most votes down. So Labor got the most votes in the last election and won. So they're at the top and all the way down. So all parties focus on supply. I've included Dr. Monique Ryan as an independent there to sort of represent the Teals. I know, again, the Teals aren't a party and they're all a little bit different, but they do have quite similar housing. So Dr. Monique Ryan's a stand-in for sort of the Teal independents at the bottom there. So Labor focuses on supply and the planning and zoning. The Liberals focus on the same, but focus on the immigration too. So Labor don't really talk about the immigration issue, but the Liberals do. Greens focus on the investor problem, while most of the other parties, and disappointingly, in my view, the Teals don't discuss that either. The Teals are, often more economically right-wing and socially more towards the left-wing. So a lot of them are wealthier. Dr. Monique Ryan's in a very wealthy electorate of Kooyong. So go figure. One Nation, I included them. They're kind of a stand-in for the Trumpet of Patriots too, which is Clive Palmer's party. I can't, in good conscience, put them in. I know a lot of everyday Aussies probably voted for them. I feel like more so they were tricked or just frustrated at the system, which I certainly am too. But I think they were tricked into voting for that party. And that party has like one line in their policies about it, and it's something like capping mortgages at 3%, which is something the government, which would completely shock the market and is unfeasible. So I didn't include them in. But One Nation, again, focus a lot heavily on immigration. That's kind of the core of their policy. They don't go as far as saying kick the immigrants out, but Pauline Hanson, if you know anything about her, probably would be happy to do that if she could have the power. And on supply, they talk about, because a lot of the time their focus is on farmers and I guess you would say tradies too, in sort of the regional areas of Queensland, and they're more of a regional focus on farmers and tradies' rights and things like that. They talk about supply, so the supply of like wood and construction costs and that, which is very important. And then again, the independents, which I find quite disappointing on this particular issue, focus more just, again, on supply and the zoning, sort of like Labor. So let's just quickly start with the teals. It's very small text there, and of course, people listen to the podcast, so I'll read it out. Disappointingly, just quite vague. A lot of the time, they talk about wanting more investment in public and social housing, an increase in rent assistance, which is good. They also want tax reform as well, and which one thing I think is good, removing those disincentives to downsize. So really what they want to do is incentivize people to downsize, which I think is good. I think on this, especially with the Teals, they do vote alongside Labor a lot. They are quite aligned with the Labor policies on this. So yeah, I mean, I would like them to a bit more around the negative gearing and capital gains tax and things like that, and look at that for even people with, from my view, it's you can have two, and then with your third and plus investment property, we start getting rid of those incentives. But you know, the Teals are the Teals, right? There you can see with One Nation, again, very thin policy, but they want to 5-year GST moratorium on building materials, which I think is kind of fair. They actually want to, the GST is at 10% on goods. They want to get rid of that for construction materials, which will probably spur supply. Government charges, so there's sort of an incorrect number. There was a whole video analysing this from someone else about the 44% cost of new homes. Apparently, it's just an incorrect maths correction, and they talk about removing the disability compliance requirements for new homes. And now, look, that's a regulation and zoning sort of one, but I think that's where, the red tape, sometimes there are things that need to happen. Maybe there's a conversation about, should it be a universal thing that all homes have to include it, or if you're building a certain amount for disabled people, there's NDIS that build homes and things like that. So there's a conversation to be had around that. There's also, I didn't include it here, but like their discussion around immigration and stopping immigration, or all of that is part of what they link to the housing crisis of immigrants coming and taking homes. So One Nation is One Nation. Greens, so their plan, again, you can see there, they view the Labor and Liberals very similar. And that is kind of true because, again, the Labor and Liberals focus on the supply and planning and zoning quite heavily. So do the Greens, but in a different way. So again, Greens are focused more on renters and social and public housing, which I think is very important. This is why I'm not really a member. Well, I'm not a member of a party anymore, because I think we need to do both, because there's always going to be renters and people that need social housing, and there's always going to be homeowners and investors. We need to find a way to incorporate everyone. And our party that focuses on just one, I mean, I get why they get the votes from that, but we need to find a way to bring that floor up, that renters and people in social housing can have a sustainable housing and have a life, so they can build their life and move forward. So a lot of the Greens, again, they do actually talk about mortgage owners with regulating the banks, but again, they're a little bit thin on policy about how they'll actually do that. And then again, they do, so to stat there that 70% of young people believe they'll never be able to afford a home. So at least they're touching on this idea that we want more young people owning homes, because we're talking about if we want to get rid of immigration and have more Australians having children. And, I would consider myself kind of Australia first too. Like, I'm not anti-immigrant. I think the diversity and multiculturalism in Australia is one of our greatest strengths. My wife's an immigrant, so I support all of that. But I do think as well that if we want Australians, like if the right wing are saying we want Australians to be having more children, we need to, like, if a young person doesn't even feel like they can afford and own a home, they're not going to be thinking about having children. So this is where I think the Greens have they do actually have a lot of common sense. They get criticised for not. But if we look at these policies, they definitely do. I'm going to speed up a little bit. So the coalitions have a lot of policy statements. It basically boils down to, they did focus a lot on first home buyers, and they have example there of that if you have interest on your home loan, you'd be able to get a discount on that, which I think did appeal to a lot of young homeowners. I don't think these policies are why they didn't win, but I think as well they had that plan that Australians would be able to access $50,000 of their super to save for a deposit, kind of like they did in COVID when you could withdraw $10,000 of your super. The problem with that is super is supposed to be an investment for retirement that you're not supposed to touch. That's the whole point of it. And I think a lot of people were like, hang on a minute, you guys talk about fiscal responsibility and saving and, not buying avocado on toast so you can save up for a house, but take $50,000 out of your retirement savings that will compound. I don't even know the calculation, but $50,000 over the life of your career would lead up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just take that out and buy a house. So not that financially responsible for the party that claims to be financially responsible. We'll get to Labor, because Labor are in charge. So their whole thing is about 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years, which I fully support. I think Labor, the Greens said we could always do more. But look, it's a start and Labor are trying. So I'll give them credit for that. They haven't really delivered much on it yet. They've only about 6 months into their term. So if they're putting in the groundwork, that's good. But as you can see, their focus is on homes for first home buyers. They want to do this 5% deposit for first home buyers, which I've read, Scott Pape and Mark Burris from Yellow Brick Road, maybe those people are a bit more fiscally conservative right wing, but they talk about how a 95% deposit for a first home buyer, maybe it'll get them in the market, but that's a really high burden on the loan. Their repayments will be very high and it might put them under a lot more financial stress. So I'm not sure if I agree with that one. But again, they focus a lot on speeding up construction, free TAFE for tradies and things like that. So they weave it into a lot of their other policies. And I think that's good. They are trying to focus on construction and the supply chain issues and things as well. They do have, with the first home owners, the Help to Buy scheme, which is the government sort of co-owning the house with you and then you're slowly paying it off. I like that a lot more. I haven't looked too much into the details of that. I've focused more on the building of the houses at 1.2 million, which the Greens and the Coalition, the Liberals and Nationals both obstructed, which I think was horrible. It set everything back. But I think Labor are, I'm not going to grade them, but some good ideas and some not so good ideas. Taking this all into consideration, I've sort of proposed 4 solutions. I don't think they're going to solve the whole housing crisis, but I think they're things that to me make a lot of sense. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think the first one to address supply is the opposition parties, so Liberals or Coalition, Greens, One Nation and the Independents shouldn't be obstructing progress on this. I think they need to get on board with Labor to build those 1.2 million homes and do whatever they can to support that getting done. Even if it makes Labor look good and is a win, if they hold that up, it's just going to hold up this housing crisis. And if they do that to try and win votes, I'm going to keep talking about that because that's horribly cynical for any party to do. Investors, we've got to disincentivize 3+ investment properties. So sorry, Eddie Deline, you might have to sell a few of those 150 because again, it's that supply you can increase by building houses, but the houses we already have, if you have mega landlords that are owning that many, it's that hogging. With children, if they're playing with the ball for too long, you let the other child have a go. Now, it's not communism where it's no private ownership. People should be allowed to own homes, but I want more people to own homes. And so those tax breaks for 3 or more investment properties have to go. I'd like to see older Aussies be incentivized to sell their houses. My brother Cameron, when he came on, suggested a policy where it's like you get the capital gains tax discount or a higher discount or no capital gains tax possibly. That you'd have to cost that and all that. But for older Australians selling to first-time buyers, even if like grandparents or parents selling to their children or older people that might be on the fence of going to like semi-retirement living or some other kind of living, selling their big houses. If we can incentivize them to do that, I think that's great. And this is where I'm going to disappoint maybe my left-wing and Greens friends. I'm no longer in the Greens party for good reason, but we need that reduction of immigration. I've said slight, maybe it is more than slight, but the 446,000 number from 2024 is way too. We can't sustain that. If that keeps going for the next 2 or 3 years, we are in big trouble. Not because of any behaviors or crime from migrants. That's all. A lot of that is overblown, and I'll be doing a whole series on immigration, so stay tuned. My number, so you go, what's your solution then? 250,000 a year. That was the number before COVID. For sort of the 5 years before COVID, that was kind of the average. It still sounds like a lot, but it's much more sustainable. We are a huge country and we do have issues with, Australian citizens giving birth, fertility things. Our sort of birth rate is quite low and that's why one of the reasons why migration was so high, especially after COVID, when we had negative migration for that COVID year. Labor sort of tried to incentivize people to come over, but we need to look at that, and we do need to reduce it. Back to our friend, I don't want to forget our friend Eddie Deline and the metaphor that I said of the monopoly board. The whole thing that I think government should serve in this is that they are the regulator. Monopoly was designed as a game to show what happens when capitalism doesn't have regulation, and mega landlords, the winner of Monopoly becomes a mega landlord that owns all the property, and everyone else goes broke and has to serve them essentially. They lose. But in real life, we can't have real life being like a Monopoly board because those people that are in poverty leads to crime, and I'll be talking about crime soon. We want that floor to be raised. I don't want everyday Aussies struggling in the way that they are starting to. 1 in 7 in poverty is a shameful number for our country. Homelessness is increasing. That social housing is decreasing. We're going in the wrong direction, and it's not Eddie. Come on my show. It's not your fault. You're not personally to blame. You're just working within a system that incentivizes you to own more land and property. And look, I want more people to own land and property. I have so many friends that have that are saving, working hard. It's not lazy drug users who don't want to get a job or don't want to do anything. Everyday Aussies who are really trying are struggling to get into the property market, and that needs to change. So if something encourages Eddie to sell 50 of his properties so he only owns 100, I am all for that. If you're a capitalist who thinks that that's a crazy idea and he should be allowed to do whatever he wants without restriction, let's chat. I'm open to hearing different ideas, but I just think the Australia I want to live in, everyone who wants to work hard, have a job and start a family and have a home, the Australian dream should have a chance to make that happen. That's my point of view. And I will support any politician or party that comes up with common sense policies to do that. Labor, I'm just going to focus on their top line of that 1.2 million houses until 2029, from 2024 over the next 4 years. I fully support that as a goal. I'd love to see them do it. Am I confident they will? I'll show you the reason that I'm not. My last point here. So this is the number of properties owned by current politicians. I think the top one is 2024, and that bottom one there was released a month ago of 2025. I've just included 5 and above. There's, I think, 56% of politicians own more than one home. And I think it's close to 100% of politicians at least own a home. There are a few that don't, like Bob Katter, who I don't know how he doesn't own a home. And a couple of Greens and a few other members don't own a home. They are renters, but most politicians at least own a home, and over half own more than one. And Michelle Ananda-Rajah, a Labor senator, owns 7 now, is disclosed 6th. And that's where people go, oh, the Liberal Party, they're the party of the rich people and all that. Those red lines at the top, that's Labor. The top 6 highest property owners, or the top, the ones that own 6 or 7, are mostly Labor. So you go, well, why are politicians not declaring this housing crisis and really trying to get it done? Well, because maybe it personally might affect their bank accounts and their portfolios. So, if you want to blame the government and be anti-government, I'm all for that. But I still don't want to lose hope and check out, because I think the problem will be, we'll go, oh, the government won't help. All these politicians are corrupt and they own houses. Yes, they do. And they're still in power, whether we like it or not. We need to call it out. We need to hold them accountable. We need to talk more about this and be solution focused and work on real solutions for real everyday Aussies, because they're the ones that suffer at the end of the day if we have bad policies and we don't get it done. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been the solutions to the housing crisis. This is The Rightest Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie, the podcast for the politically homeless. Please let me know your thoughts. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good things. And we'll be talking about other topics very soon.